Insurance isn't one size fits all. That's why drivers have enjoyed Progressive's Name Your Price tool for years now. With the Name Your Price tool, you tell them what you want to pay, and they'll show you options that fit your budget. So whether you're picking out your first policy or just looking for something that works better for you and your family, they make it easy to see your options. Visit Progressive.com. Find a rate that works for you with the Name Your Price tool. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. Stop waiting around for the perfect candidate. Instead, use Indeed sponsored jobs to find the right people with the right skills fast. It's a simple way to make sure your listing is the first candidates see. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs have 4 times more applicants than non-sponsored jobs. So go build your dream team today with Indeed. Get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Gentlemen, how was your weekend?
Fair.
Apparently, we all sat on the couch and watched preseason football.
I don't remember. Well, you know what? It was not eventful for you, which is good because we have men and women defending you all weekend long. They were on duty, OG, so you didn't have to be.
That's right.
Duty.
That's always a plus. On behalf of the men and women making podcast in Mom's Basement, the men and women at Navy Federal Credit Union who serve our troops, here's a big salute to the troops to kick off our week. Thank you for all you do. Let's go stack some Benjamins together.
Thanks, everybody.
I, Maxwell E. Snavely, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath the following. To my wife, Rose, who spent money like there was no tomorrow, I leave $100 and a calendar. To my sons, Rodney and Victor, who spent every dime I ever gave them on fancy cars and fast women, I leave $50 in dimes. And to my other friends and relatives who also never learned the value of $1, I leave $1.
Live from Joe's mom's basement, it's the Stacking Benjamin Show. I'm Joe's mom's neighbor, Doug, and have you thought about your legacy? Well, here to help, we welcome you to Estate Planning and Charitable Giving Week on the show. Kicking things off, we'll ask 3 big estate planning questions to our favorite basement-dwelling attorney, Tim Semro. Plus, we'll get Tim's help with a recent headline on life insurance. And don't you worry, because I'll also share some of my absolutely incredible trivia. You're going to love today's dose, trust me. And now, 3 guys who just found out their get-rich-quick scheme might take 40 years. It's Joe, OG, and attorney Tim Semro.
Hey there, stackers.
I sound like Scooby-Doo.
Row. Happy Monday to you, stackers. Welcome back to another fun week of podcast estate planning and charitable giving week. And the guy who we think is the most charitable guy on this podcast is getting deep, Doug. Mr. O. Mr. OG's
starting
here.
out with lies. You're a damned liar, Joe.
Isn't the fact that I'm here is my biggest gift to all of you.
It truly is.
Yeah.
It truly is. And actually, OG, we are super happy that we do have the gift that keeps giving to this show. Actually, he's been on it once, and he's back for his triumphant return appearance. Attorney Tim Semro is here. How are you, man?
I'm doing great. It's great to be back.
It's fun to have you back. How's life in the estate planning world? Is exciting. I think it's like Matlock, right? You do these amazing cases in front of these big juries. And
Okay, yeah. If I'm standing next to you in court, you're in trouble because I don't even know where to stand in court, so I don't go to court.
That's my lawyer. Awesome.
that is my guy. Well, what he does know, though, is estate planning documents up and down. How long have you been practicing estate planning, Tim?
Let's see, over 20 years now.
Well, we've got some fantastic, just a couple days. We got some fantastic questions for you and for OG on estate planning that we got from our basement Facebook group from our stackers. So we're going to see if we can make Tim sweat. That's the goal today. Before we get to your questions, though, we got a couple of sponsors who make sure we can keep on keeping on. We're going to hear from them. And then Tim, OG, Doug, and I, Well, mostly Tim and then some OG. Not very much Doug and I.
I like to
We're going
watch.
to we're going to tackle your questions. You may not know that when we started Stacking Benjamins, it was a blog. And even then, just the startup cost, I remember thinking, is this the right thing? And what if I write things and nobody comes, right? Well, luckily, that didn't end up happening. But starting something new isn't just hard. It's terrifying. There's so much work. You're not sure whether it's going to work out. You're not sure if anybody's going to read it. And then we change it to a podcast. Is anybody actually going to listen, right? What if nobody wants all the stuff that we have? Well, had I used Shopify, it would have been even easier because with their expertise, their helpful tools, and their easy to use platform, that's something that would have made Stacking Benjamins more effective much, much more quickly. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world and 10% of all e-commerce in the U.S. Names you've heard of like Heinz and Mattel, Shopify, Gymshark, Aviator Nation, Allbirds, also all Shopify. Get started with your own design studio with hundreds of ready-to-use templates. Shopify helps you build a beautiful online store that matches your brand style. And best yet, Shopify is your commerce expert with world-class expertise in everything from managing inventory to international shipping to processing returns and beyond. And did I mention that iconic purple Shop Pay button? It's used by millions of businesses around the world. It's why Shopify has the best converting checkout on the planet. It also helps boost conversions, meaning less carts going abandoned and more sales for you. So you're stacking Benjamins much more quickly. Time to turn those what ifs into with Shopify today. Sign up for your $1 per month trial today at shopify.com/SB. Go to shopify.com/SB. That's shopify.com/SB. Dell PCs with Intel Inside are built for the moments you plan and the ones you don't. They're for those all-night study sessions, the moment you're working from a cafe and realize every outlet's taken, the times you're deep in your flow and can't be interrupted by an auto update. That's why Dell builds tech that adapts to you. Built with long-lasting batteries so you're not scrambling for an outlet, and built-in intelligence that makes updates around your schedule, not in the middle of it. Find technology built for the way you work at Dell.com/Dell PCs. Built for you. All right, guys, let's start with this really kind of a straightforward question from Stacker Nick. Nick actually has two questions, but the basic one I think, Tim, that most people ask is this. At what point does a trust make sense? So first of all, I think for our new stackers that have no idea what we're even talking about here, can you explain the difference between a trust and a will? And then maybe we'll dive into how a trust makes sense.
Yeah, so a trust avoids probate. A will goes through probate. So if you own something in your own name with no beneficiary, no co-owner when you die, that goes through probate. Anything that goes through contract law, which would be like beneficiary designations, payable on death designations, they all avoid probate, and trusts are a contract. So a lot of times we use trusts to enhance the probate avoidance. It's not the only way to avoid probate, but it's one way to avoid probate. We can add creditor protection, tax savings, all kinds of things like protecting people when they have special needs situations, special needs children, all through trusts. So trusts are a different animal. They're more cost up front, but cheaper on the back end because you don't have to go through the probate process.
It almost feels to me, Tim, like a company that kind of continues when you die. Like you become the CEO of a company, and even though you die, the company lives on with these written rules. Is that a fair analogy or is that a bad one?
Yeah, no, I like that. We often say that the trust doesn't die. It lives on beyond you. And in fact, with a revocable trust, for example, your social security number is the ID number of the trust until you die, because people always want to know, does this trust file its own tax return? Well, it becomes a taxpayer after you pass away and files its own tax return. So yeah, I like that. That's how they continue on.
Is there a way to make it a taxpayer on my behalf before I die?
Like, how do I get it to pay my taxes for me?
Pay your taxes
now. The company
now.
needs to make more money.
Yeah.
If you could make that happen, that would be great. Okay, so trust avoids probate, more expense up front, but cheaper later on, smoother process later on. At what point does the trust make sense then, to Nick's question?
Yeah. And this is a question we get a lot. And actually, it annoys me when you'll see attorneys all the time will say, well, if you don't have this number, like you don't have $1 million, you don't need a trust. Well, it really has to do with what is your situation. So, for example, if you have a special needs child and you have, let's say, $300,000 or $400,000, you might need a trust to make sure that if you pass away, that child is taken care of and they don't lose their government benefits, things like that. On the other hand, you could have $3 million leaving it all to a charity and you don't care how they spend it. Well, in that case, you just put a beneficiary designation to that charity and you don't need a trust. It really has to do with what you're trying to accomplish. Do you have issues with family? Do you have issues with the assets, meaning they're over a certain number? Or is the tax laws coming in and invading into your space? Then you might need to use a trust to try to avoid taxes.
How onerous is probate really?
I think it's overblown on the people like to scare the public with how bad probate is. It's a necessary evil, right? So if you don't do your own plan or if you just have a will, then you have probate. And all it is the court making sure that things are properly transferred. However, in order to do that, they need to have notice be sent out to all the beneficiaries of the will and potential beneficiaries. You have to send notice out for creditors to see. So there's all these notices, which means we add time. And then who has to do all this stuff? Well, the attorneys have to do all these filings, and that costs money. So they're right about the fact that it does cost money. It does take a lot of time, but there's nothing scary about it. It's just a process that can be avoided. And ironically, it's usually more expensive than if you just did the planning up front. So it's kind of the last resort.
Yeah. Oh, gee, Tim talked about putting beneficiaries on things. I know you've seen some scary beneficiary designations before, like ones from 20 years ago where people go, to use Doug's phrase from last week, oopsie.
Yeah. Ultimately, with the beneficiary thing, I think a lot of people just assume that what they wrote a long time ago, and a long time could mean a year, is still what's being recorded somewhere. You know, the reality is that all of this stuff is electronic now, right? So somebody's not thumbing through a filing cabinet going, what is Jack's beneficiary? It's what the computer says. It does sound really weird, but there are situations where those files get lost, or that information gets erased for some reason, or somebody fat fingers the account number when it's being coded in, and all of a sudden your beneficiary is now this other person that you never heard of for whatever reason, notwithstanding all the other stuff that can go wrong, like fraud and all that other sort of stuff. So beneficiaries are a very simple way to make sure that your stuff goes to where you want it to, whether it's the trust or your kids or charity or whatever, but you still have to pay attention to it every so often.
Yeah, and this is a really good point, by the way, because I think what happens is a lot of times as time goes by, people move, they open new accounts, and they kind of forget about the fact that they had a beneficiary on their first account, but they don't have beneficiaries on their accounts now. And this is where trusts are really powerful, because if you have all of your beneficiaries going to the trust and you want to make a change, all you have to do is change one document. And we spend a lot of time on, we call this funding, where you get the beneficiary designations. And this is why we tell people, hey, every couple of years, you need to be looking at your estate plan. We usually sit down with people about every 2 years and say, hey, what's changed? What accounts have you opened? Have you got a new broker? You know, your beneficiary designations may have fallen off. Or here's a good one is if you have a certificate of deposit and you put a beneficiary on that and it rolls into the next CD, that beneficiary usually drops off when it rolls.
Oh,
and people
wow.
just assume that it's still there.
Yeah, or kids can get older, or family members can pass away, or you can have new marriages or whatever. I've got a question on this as we're talking about trust, because this came up in a conversation that I had some time ago. So I've got a trust, and the trust says that I want all my stuff to go into the trust. And then I've got an account at Fidelity that has no beneficiary, because I don't need to have a beneficiary, because I have a trust that says all my stuff's supposed to go in my trust. Like, I've already written that down. What's going to happen with that Fidelity account? Is Fidelity going to pay attention to the trust, or is Fidelity going to say, we can't do anything with that because you didn't do our process? Which one takes precedent?
Yeah, we run into this all the time because people assume, or what they'll do is they'll attach a list to their trust and it says, here's all my assets that are in this trust. That's not how it works. You have to remember each account is its own separate entity, and it has a contract that says, here's who it pays to at death. If you don't put a beneficiary on there, there's somewhere in the fine print says this will pay to your estate, not to your trust, because they don't know you have a trust. So it'll pay to your estate. Then it depends if you have what a normal estate plan would do. When we do a trust, we have what's called a pour over will, and a pour over will set it up so that the probate will go into your trust. However, we just took a step through probate that we just did the estate plan to avoid that. And I always tell people, look, I don't want to be sitting down with your family someday and going through probate. And they say to me,
Pouring everything over.
why are we going through probate? All that does is create more fees for you, Tim. And weren't we supposed to avoid this? Well, yeah. So that's why we spend a lot of time on the beneficiary designations.
I think the problem with this one in particular was that it was also a qualified account. And so it wasn't as simple as it's just going to go to my estate as the default. Yeah. It might go to your spouse if living or something like that. And then, of course, if it's qualified, then there's distribution rules and requirements based on who is the beneficiary and who's not.
Yeah, and a lot of that we don't know until after they pass away what the best answer would be. So especially with qualified accounts, we do what's called a layered approach. We'll have spouse, we'll have trust, we'll have the children, and then we can use what they call disclaimers to layer that up and figure out which one is the best one after the fact, because the laws change, the family situation changes. So it's better to be prepared. And that, again, that's why we spend so much time on it.
But having it blank is not a good answer.
Blank is bad. Yeah.
Blank is
especially with a qualified account, you're going to pay to the estate and you're going to end up taking all that tax in the estate.
Yeah.
I wish I had that advice before I took the SATs.
Tim, way back a long, long time ago when I was a financial planner, we worried about the estate tax. And then for most of the stackers out there, that went away as the estate tax number went up and up and up and up. But my understanding is with the new OBBB, the estate tax might be coming back for people. Am I right about that?
Well, they've extended a lot of the income tax rules in that bill. But what they did for the estate tax is they put in a $15 million exemption per person, and then it's indexed from there. So really, if we have a married couple, we're at 30 million right now. So
30.
That still excludes almost every client. But yeah, I mean, there always is that chance down the road that either the client's assets increase above 30, could always happen, or they could always pull that back when they need more money. And people will say, well, I don't ever have to worry about the estate tax again. And I always say to them, well, do you think we'll always have a Republican president, Republican Congress? Probably not. It'll probably change. And at that point, the winds could change on how they have these laws. So,
well, it's like OG and I were talking about last week. Remember this, Doug, when OG was laughing about somebody who told him, well, now that the tax law is permanent.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now that it's permanent. Yes,
Let's make some moves.
And OG starts rolling on the ground with laughter. Is it ever permanent?
And on the estate tax side, that's just the federal side. There's, I mean, how many states are there that have their own estate tax with different limits and inheritance taxes, perhaps, which is the other side of the estate tax, right? So depending on what state you live in, you may be well under 30 million, but you may be well above whatever that limit is for that state.
You do. You have to look at your individual state. A lot of the states have gotten rid of their estate tax now, but there are still some that have either an estate tax or an inheritance tax. And then the sneaky thing people always forget about is they say, look, I don't have an estate tax. I don't have to worry about that. But there are income tax implications when you have an estate. For example, if you buy a share of stock at $1, you sell it at $10, you pay a gain on that $9 gain, you pay a capital gains tax. Well, when you pass away, you get a step up in basis to that value as of death. Well, it depends on who owns that, because the decedent is who gets that step up in basis. So a lot of times when we're doing the planning, we're using some clever tools to get the most step up in basis in all the assets from both spouses, so we can save income tax. And that can be thousands of dollars that people didn't even realize they were going to have to pay.
You see some of these shortcuts sometimes, Tim, like a parent will deed the house to a kid before they pass away. Does that kind of ruin some of this step up in basis stuff? I mean, do you end up inadvertently falling into a tax that you wouldn't have had to pay if you hadn't done that?
That's a great point. And we had a client one time where this happened. They said, hey, grandma's going to be going into the nursing home, so she's going to gift away all of her stuff to the kids. And she gifted all her stock accounts and her house to the kids. And then ironically, she died within 6 months. So she never even got on Medicaid. And as a result of that gift, you get what's called carryover basis, which is the same basis she had. So they had to pay that capital gain. If they would have just left it in her name or done some different planning, you could have got that step up in basis and then not paid the income tax. There's
so many unintended consequences, I think we find with some of these shortcuts in estate planning. I know one thing an attorney told me a long time ago, you often see that, you'll put your kid's name on your bank account as an example. The kid gets in legal trouble or goes through a divorce. Half of that bank account, whatever their name is, my understanding is then is opened up to that divorce proceeding or that legal challenge.
Yeah, and the argument you try to make is that you funded the account, so it should be to you, but it's up to the judge at that point, and they may look at it differently. So you're just opening yourself up to all kinds of potential liability. And there's such easy ways to avoid that. And using simple trust, not even very complex trusts, where we could let the kids have access to the money, feel like they own it if that's what you want, but not give them the ownership, which would subject it to their creditors and subject you to having to pay that.
That sounded like a lot of life at my house. It might be like yours too, OG, where your kids feel like they own your money.
Yeah.
I've had kids feel that before.
It's really interesting when they ask you for something and you go, well, why don't you use your money? And they go, I don't really want it that badly. You're like, but 5 seconds ago, you really wanted it when it was my Amex card.
It's on your
when
cash.
It's yours. You don't want, you're good. All right.
It's amazing how my twins are 30, and yet when I show up in town, I still get to pay for everything.
Yeah.
It's incredible. Yeah. And actually, I don't mind. That's fine. Tina has a couple of questions for you, Tim, about these terms that you see often, especially on bank accounts, brokerage accounts. You have to choose between joint tenancy with right of survivorship or tenancy in common. What does that mean as it relates to probate or passing property on to heirs?
Yeah, so a tenants in common means you own, let's say you and I are 50% tenants in common owners. That means we each own 50% of the account. And then if I pass away, it goes to whoever my heirs are, or if I put a beneficiary designation on there. Whereas if I have joint tenancy with right of survivorship, that means whoever passes away, their interest goes to the survivor of the two of them. So it's a completely different situation. And a lot of states, this gets really tricky with deeds, because some states, if you say to two people and they happen to be married, that's automatically a joint tenancy with right of survivor, even if you didn't say that. And in some states, it's not. It's tenants in common. And you could have where the husband dies, everybody thinks it's going to go over to the wife for the full ownership of the house, for example, and all of a sudden half the house is in probate, because that's not how that state happens to read it. Works the same with bank accounts. If you want it to be joint with right of survivorship, that means the survivor will get the entire account, which may be what you want, maybe not. And if you put tenants in common, then you need to designate where that's going to go. Otherwise, it'll end up in probate.
If half your house is going into probate, can you specify like not the half with the kitchen, the refrigerator?
It's interesting you say that, because tenants in common means you have a 50% right to the entire house.
Damn.
Which is a weird thing. I don't know what that even means, but it's not like there's a line drawn down the middle and you can say, well, this is your half. This is my half. This is what we get into with the family cottage, where the kids end up owning tenants in common. And the one kid says, I'm going to paint the front door purple. And the other kid says, no, I want it green. And so they could just keep painting it back and forth. And they both have a right to do that. That's one of the extreme examples.
You can paint all of it half, which makes no sense. There's also this term that you'll see often in a state, per stirpes. What does per stirpes even mean?
Stripes. They just spell
per
it
stripes.
Wrong.
Yeah.
Per stirpes, it's Latin. So
one person got it wrong a long time ago and they just left it.
They just copy and pasted for the last 30 years. It's really dumb.
Messed up per stripe. So
it's Latin. It means by the stocks. And in almost every state, this is what it means. If you have two kids and you say per stirpes, you're going to have 50% shares to those two kids. If one of those kids has already passed away and has two children, you still have 50-50 share. It's just the 150% share is going to drop down to the two grandkids. The opposite of that would be per capita, which means by the heads. And most people don't understand what that is. That would say in that case where the one kid has passed away and you have two grandkids, we divide it into thirds. Everybody says, well, that doesn't make any sense. Now, all of a sudden, the one child is only getting a third instead of a half. What you really need to know is, does your state have a default of per stirpes or per capita if you don't indicate? Because that can cause some surprises.
Oh.
But if you put
or just have a trust, for God's sake.
I was just going to say, yeah, if you put all of this stuff in a trust, you're going to specify all of that. Can any of that override what your state default is?
The trust is a contract, so it overrides everything. You can agree on anything you want in the trust that's legal, and then you don't get caught up in these arcane rules that nobody knows about.
He had to slip in the that's legal.
This is, again, though, Tim, assuming that you've made the beneficiary on the account the trust.
To the trust, yeah.
Or the trust owns it, yeah.
That's why I said people, and I think this is where attorneys make a lot of mistakes, is as soon as the ink is dried on the signing of the trust document, they're out of there and they hand over the documents and they're done. And the funding, the beneficiary designations is so important, because I could write the best plan ever and it's completely worthless if you didn't do your beneficiary designations.
Well, going back to that company analogy earlier, it's like having a company that's just this empty thing, no machinery in it at all.
Big empty warehouse with nothing in it.
Yeah. Let's move on to Annette's question. She asks, what considerations in your estate plan need to be made if you move states often or even countries? Like some of our stackers, Tim, are thinking about maybe becoming nomads or expats after retirement. How does that change your estate plan?
Yeah, I know that there's actually a whole group that does that where you retire and then you get all your health care on cruise ships. So you take when the cruise ship is relocating, you can jump on that cruise ship, get a cheaper rate, and then you can get all your health care there because they have doctors. So some of this depends on, well, let's start with the states. If you're moving from state to state, it kind of depends on which state you're moving from. As long as when you signed it was legal in the state that you signed it in, it'll be honored in any other state, but they're going to interpret it under that new state's laws. So we usually tell people, and I just had this happen yesterday, come on in, we'll talk about what the difference is. Maybe we make a couple little tweaks, but if you're in the United States, it's probably not a big change. And we often have clients that will either retire or they move for a job to, I've got clients in Dubai, clients in India, South Korea, a lot of other countries, but they're keeping their U.S. citizenship. So that's the big thing. If you're keeping your U.S. citizenship, most of your plan is going to be under the United States laws, and you'll have a United States estate plan. It gets tricky and complicated when you start to open accounts in the new country that you're in. Then sometimes we have to consult with attorneys in the other countries to figure out, okay, Ireland's rules are different than the United States, and stuff like that.
Yeah, I tried that whole healthcare on the cruise ship thing once, Tim. I got a colonoscopy and I didn't even ask for one.
He's here all week.
Just made it happen.
That's fantastic.
Doug's up on the Lido deck smoking a cigarette after.
Can't wait to come back to this cruise.
Still haven't gotten the results.
What happens in these situations? You go to grandma's house and she's got this will from 3 years ago that looks like it's a genuine will. And then there's stuff from 6 months ago that looks like it might've been written in crayon, but it clearly is grandma's penmanship. Like, if we've got multiple will situations, how does that shake out?
Well, so a couple things there. The first is, which will is going to govern. I mean, your most recent will, if it's a valid will, and that's the question, is it a valid will? So if it was handwritten, like in your example, there's very few states that allow holographic handwritten wills. Texas is one of them. But most states, they have to actually be typewritten. And then almost every state requires witnesses on the will. So if you didn't have witnesses and proper execution of that will, then it may not be honored. But those get tricky in the case law because it could be that they signed, they had witnesses, and the court looks at it and wants to honor it because they can kind of tell that was what they wanted to do. But it can get very difficult, especially we do have this happen with older clients where they start signing wills after they've signed with us, and we don't know, is this really what they wanted or not? And then especially if the witnesses are interested witnesses, meaning they're family members or they're people who are inheriting, now you're going to have all kinds of trouble when you try to prove that out.
Yeah, I think two things. Obviously, this is part of the reason why you want to make sure that you have some conversations with people, Tim, on a somewhat regular basis, every 3 years or something like that. Kind of going back to the international thing real quick, does it matter from a citizenship? You mentioned if you have your U.S. citizenship, does it matter if you have a spouse? Let's say you live in the United States, but your spouse is not a U.S. citizen. What, if anything, do you have to pay attention to for that?
Very much so, because basically the U.S. looks at that and says, we want to keep these assets under our law. And they know if you leave it to your spouse, that's going to go outside of their law. So there's a whole different set of rules on what the marital deduction is, how much you can leave to them before you start paying estate tax. And so you use special trusts that keep the assets in the United States under their jurisdiction beyond the death of the citizen, so that you don't have this instant taxation or an unexpected tax that comes in.
So that might be one of the difference between, do I need a will, do I need a trust? If your spouse is not a U.S. citizen.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, if your spouse is not a U.S. citizen, yeah,
absolutely. At that point,
have to talk to an attorney at that point, because there are a lot of other rules that come into play at that point too that we need to pay attention to.
What about if you already answered that, which is you're a U.S. citizen but you live somewhere else? You said as long as you keep your U.S. citizenship, and I guess mostly your money is in the U.S. You're traveling for work or you're on a duty assignment somewhere. You're still
the tricky part is when you're working in another country and they say, well, I'm not a citizen of any specific state. I'm just a citizen of the United States, but you do have to pick a state and you have to have some tie to that state. And my suggestion would be
Wyoming.
somehow get a tie to a state that doesn't have an income tax, right? Because we had a
I just picked that one because I thought it was a cool state.
He would travel for the military all the time, and he was tied to a state that had an income tax, and he was paying income tax in that state for his wages. And I said, you should establish a different state first before you head
for
out.
Uncle Sam, for God's sake. Pick a different one. Try again.
Yeah.
You should quote unquote move. Yeah.
He's like, I'm from New York. You're like, are you though? New York? Really? Try again. Pick a different one out of the hat.
But there is a way to do that. That'll save a lot in taxes.
That could be a ton of money. Coming up in the second half of today's discussion, Tim's going to help us talk about life insurance in your estate plan and long-term care. This is the issue that drives everyone crazy. And so we're going to get Tim and OG's take. But it's the halfway point, which means, Doug, you've got today's date in history and a little bit of trivia for us. What's going on, man?
I got a whole lot of trivia, Joe. Hey there, stackers. I'm Joe's mom's neighbor, Doug. And with all this talk about estate planning, why don't we focus on a movie people died to be in?
Oh, no.
One based on events that allegedly happened on this date in 1973, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. While mostly fictional, the character of Leatherface in this Benjamin Stacking horror film was based on a real guy named Ed Gein.
So close.
Ed was... This just slips out sometimes. Ed was mostly your typical Midwestern dude. He mowed the lawn in jean shorts. He rooted for the Packers, made a mean casserole. Well, he did have this one quirk where he robbed graves and kept trophies of human body parts, or as Tim Semro would say, decedents. But, Ed was a perfectly normal guy besides that. The film Texas Chainsaw Massacre amassed a ton of money over the years. Produced for just $300,000, the film went on to gross $30 million in the U.S. alone. While Ed saw none of this money, he was also the inspiration for another film, this one created by famous director Alfred Hitchcock, in which they detailed Ed's problems with a domineering mom. Are you listening? Which led to Ed developing what some psychologists might describe as soft skill issues while dealing with patrons of his family-owned motel. Here's the question. What Hitchcock film that, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, was also based on Ed Gein's life? I'll be back right after I go dust the living room. Speaking of overbearing moms!
You're listening to this podcast, so I know you've got a curious mind. Here's a helpful fact you may not know yet. Drivers who switch and save with Progressive save over $900 on average. Pop over to Progressive.com, answer some questions, and you'll get a quick quote with discounts that are easy to come by. In fact, 99% of their auto customers earn at least one discount. Visit Progressive.com and see if you can enjoy a little cash back. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $946 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2024 and May 2025. Potential savings will vary.
What would you do if your online store converted 36% more shoppers? You could take 36% more vacation.
Another pina colada?
Yes, please.
Open a new retail location with 36% more square feet.
Fantastic.
Hire 36% more help.
You're hired and you're hired.
Shopify has the world's best converting checkout, up to 36% better than other e-commerce platforms. What you do with those extra sales is up to you. Switch to Shopify today at shopify.com/listen and get a $1 trial. Shopify.com/listen.
Did you know Fast Growing Trees is America's largest and most trusted online nursery with thousands of trees and plants and over 2 million happy customers? Whether you're planting fruit trees, adding privacy, brightening things up with flowers, or bringing in houseplants, Fast Growing Trees has it all. Even better, they can help you find options that are right for your climate, your space, and lifestyle. Click Order Grow. Every plant arrives healthy with the Alive and Thrive guarantee straight to your door. So if you're ready to get planting, this is the moment. Right now, they have great deals on spring planting essentials, up to half off on select plants. And listeners to our show get 20% off their first purchase when using the code WWO at checkout. That's an additional 20% off. Better plants and better growing at fastgrowingtrees.com using the code WWO at checkout. Fastgrowingtrees.com, code WWO. Now's the perfect time to plant. Let's grow together. Use WWO to save today. Offer is valid for a limited time. Terms and conditions apply. Go to growingfasttrees.com for details.
Hey there, Stackers, I'm feathered Dustin Fool and guy who loves a good shower, Joe's mom's neighbor Doug. While Ed Gein and I both find our lives dominated by aggressive women, Ed may have taken things a little further than I did. He had a closed-off room in his house that was a shrine to his deceased mother, and while I can appreciate my feminine side from time to time, I mean, who among us can't? Really? Let's just all admit, it's probably just me. Ed, just like the character.
I love when you make yourself laugh.
I got a little sidetracked there.
Thank God one of us thinks this is funny.
Ed, I'm talking about now.
Oh.
Just like the character Hitchcock portrayed in his film, loved to dress up in women's clothing. So what was the film? Of course, the character's name was Norman Bates, and the Hitchcock film was another Benjamin Stacking flick called Psycho. Now, let's welcome back to the mic three guys who are psychos about great financial and estate planning advice, Joe, OG, and Tim Semro.
Yes, we are. Yeah. Have you guys seen those movies? I've never seen Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
No, me
Never
neither.
saw that one.
Me neither.
Yeah. Psycho I saw.
Yeah, I think there's actually a movie like maybe called Leatherface. There's something like very specifically about Ed Gein as well.
I do love that. Isn't that, speaking of, we're about to talk about insurance, but isn't that a Progressive commercial where they keep running into the
great.
barn where the chainsaws
How about we
are?
get into that running car? Are you crazy?
It's so good. Hey, in the second half, we have a special segment, which is brought to you by NHTSA. More on NHTSA later. Let's talk about insurances. Another piece of Nick's question from the first half of today's show was about life insurances. And I have a piece from Investopedia from about a month ago. This is written by Yasmin Guerramani and Shankar Narayan. Best life insurance with living benefits. And one of the living benefits that people are often interested in, Tim, is this idea of a long-term care benefit, right? Something that covers long-term care. But I also know that you may be able to do some advanced planning, but I also know there's some really strict rules around planning, and there's a fine line between fraud and doing this correctly. How do we begin to think about long-term care and tying that into our advanced planning?
Well, so the first thing is we could work out and eat correctly.
Oh, crazy.
Oh my God, get him off the
If
show.
we don't do that, I mean, that extends your life. However, the things you want to look at is your individual state law. And people usually get upset about all these restrictive rules for Medicaid, and they don't understand why are the states so restrictive. And you kind of have to understand how this starts. So the money comes from the federal government, and they give it to the states and say, here's your money for Medicaid. And then they have to make their rules based on what they see, how many people might qualify, and they have to make it basically so it fits into the amount of money that they're given. Otherwise, they got to dig in their pockets and find more money. So that's why the different states have all these different rules, and they are very restrictive, and every state is different on their rules. And the other thing is, at least in a lot of the cases we've seen, it's kind of the Wild West too on which agent gets assigned to your case. So some agents will ask questions on very specific things that other agents won't even ever ask about. So you do have to talk to an attorney in your area about this, because they'll know the individual agents that they're dealing with and how your state and your local area of your state is dealing with these rules, because it is not uniform by any stretch of the imagination. But generally speaking, what you want to do is, if you want to qualify for Medicaid, you have to get your assets under a certain number, and you're allowed to keep a certain amount of assets that are exempt, and you're allowed to keep a certain amount of income that's exempt. It matters if you're married or not, and one of the spouses is at home, and if the other spouse is in care, then that number for the assets might be higher.
But either way, it's a really small number, generally speaking.
Really small number. We're talking $1,500, $2,000. I mean, very small number if
You're
it's
not
down to
keeping
one person.
$6 million.
No, but there are the exempt assets, things like house and stuff in most states. And then if you do give away assets, then there's usually what we call a look back period. And the trick of that is, it used to be, let's say you gave a gift of $10,000 to your kids 2 years ago. They'd go back and say, all right, 2 years ago, you gave that gift. From that date forward, we do a calculation and you were ineligible for a certain amount of time. Well, now they've extended that look back period to a farther date, 5 years in most cases. And instead of saying, okay, 4 years ago, you gave away $10,000, you were ineligible for, 6 months from that date. Now they bring that gift up to today when you're applying, and they apply that disqualification period from today forward. So you really need to know the rules, because you have to hold on to enough assets to live for
that amount of time.
You can't give away all your assets. And the other thing that people, I always tell people, you got to be really careful with this, because as soon as you start giving away the assets, you don't have control of them anymore. And they'll say, well, my kids will take care of me, and they'll do that. It's a strange thing how all of a sudden preserving the estate becomes the goal of the kids, and not making sure mom and dad have the best care in some circumstances.
This is a tale as old as time, man. I mean, Shakespeare's King Lear. Yeah. Kids will take care of me, and then the daughters all go, hey, I got the cash. See you later.
Yeah, it's not always true. I mean, there are a lot of families who they'll agree on things, but you do have to be careful, because as soon as you give up control, you don't have that control anymore. And what I see with my clients is, if once they don't have control, they tend to give up sooner, and I think they die sooner, because they don't have control over anything anymore, and they don't feel like, that life has purpose or something. So you do have to be careful on that. So I try to find ways where they can keep control for the longest amount of time, have access to their assets, and maybe we're going to get on Medicaid, but maybe we're going to avoid Medicaid altogether by using things like long-term care insurance and paying for it a different way.
I'm looking at this piece, OG, about best life insurance with living benefits. And they talk about you can tap into the death benefit when you're alive if you develop a terminal, chronic, critical illness. Sometimes they're called accelerated benefits. They're also, of course, as we were just talking about, long-term care benefits. Are these a gimmick, or are these a good thing for the right person?
Well, just kind of dovetailing on what Tim said about the Medicaid thing, I always find it interesting when people are talking about like trying to figure out a way to get the government to pay for things for them. What I usually say is, you remember, these are the same people that build our roads. So be careful, like trying to get so poor that the lowest bidder is going to be taking care of your healthcare, at that point. I would rather just have a bunch of money and have to pay for it myself than figure out a way to like, I'm going to screw the government. It's like, well, who's really getting screwed on this?
Yeah.
Me or the government, probably. So be careful with that. But I think a lot is said about the concept of insurance, whether it's life insurance or long-term care insurance or disability coverage or any of these things that have a high magnitude event, but a seemingly low probability, right? I mean, I've had in the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks, we've talked about it on the show, the car insurance thing with my middle kid. I've talked to a half dozen people about, those SOBs are hosing me over my deductible. I might, it's like it just seems to come up in conversation. And then you take something like long-term care insurance, which has a very high cost associated with it, right? An average cost of care for full-time care in a nursing home is probably $8,000 a month across the country on average, would be my guess. And, you think, okay, that's $100,000 a year. Ronald Reagan lived 9 years in a memory care facility, right? It's like, that could be $1 million. It could be, to Tim's point, 6 months later and grandma kicks the bucket and it's, a couple grand, or it's 10 years of assisted care and that's $1 million. So it's a big number if it happens. And the probability of it happening is also really high, right? Statistically, a couple age 65, one of them is going to need some level of assisted care, whether that assisted care happens, every so often somebody comes to the house and says, hey, are you taking your pills? Is everything good? Or, full blown care. And usually it's a continuum, right? It starts on one end and then kind of finishes in full care, or sometimes does.
Right.
It's this weird amount of money. It's an insanely expensive insurance. And the thing that they're most concerned with is, what happens if I pay for all this crap and I don't actually use it? For some reason, that seems to be the biggest hang up. My perspective on it is that would be the best thing imaginable. It's like your car insurance, right? It's like the goal isn't to stick USAA as many times as you can by having like head-on collisions, right? It's like to avoid all of that. It's to say, well, gosh, how lucky am I? I have a 16-year-old that hasn't wrecked a car yet. It's not like those SOBs are bending me over the barrel for $2,500 every 6 months. I better wreck my Nissan one of these days to like get even. So I think we have to shift the paradigm on this a little bit of like, it's okay to pay premiums and never use it. That would be the best, especially with long-term care. In my opinion, that would be the best thing. So what insurance companies, to answer your question directly, what insurance companies have done is starting to pair products together and say, well, here's a way to prevent that. That issue of I paid for it and never got anything is, well, we'll just tie it to life insurance. So it's a life insurance product that also is long-term care. If you don't use the long-term care, we'll kick your beneficiaries a life insurance benefit. Well, okay, guess what? Now you have 2 insurance policies wrapped in one. What do you think happens to the premium?
Right.
Our insurance company's like, we make too much money.
Yeah.
We should give some back. They're right. If Josh pays for this for the next 20 years, he should get some of this back. Of course not.
Wait a minute. Are you insinuating that insurance companies find a way to stay profitable? Is this what you're insinuating?
I mean, I'm going out on a limb here. So when you're bundling things together, despite the commercial of bundle and save, you're very likely paying for 2 things at the same time, and there's going to be an added cost. So I would say that if you are the type of person who is hesitant to have assisted care coverage, long-term care coverage, because you're worried that you're going to live forever, die in your sleep, and never get a benefit out of that, then either reduce the amount the risk that you're transferring to the third party. So you say, well, I'm going to cover the first 3 years then of long-term care. I just don't want to be on the hook for years 4 through 10, or you can look at one of these products that combines 2 things at the same time, if that makes you sleep better and it covers you for more of a realistic exposure.
I have a question for you on that, because I've been in some meetings where these have been discussed. And is your experience that having those hybrid policies, that they're efficient, or do you see more often that people are getting a life insurance policy and a long-term care policy, that the policy that specializes in the problem that they have, rather than getting a hybrid policy that, from what I could see, doesn't do either as well?
Yeah, I think what's happening is the insurance companies and there's hundreds of companies that do this. I think the insurance companies are saying, what's the probability and magnitude of each one of these things, and pricing accordingly for that. So it's like, okay, I've got a 65-year-old couple and they want to have $100,000 of long-term care coverage versus $100,000 of 10-year term insurance. What's going to be priced? Well, the long-term care coverage is going to be way more expensive because the probability of that happening is much higher. And so then it's going to be priced that way, with a little back end of, we'll give you, and it's usually what you get back is the return of premium. You know what I mean? So you think what's happening is you're paying this premium to the insurance company, they're investing it, they're making the returns on the money that you're giving them as premiums. And then they just have to, at some point in time, 10, 20 years from now, give you back your premium numbers. They've earned all the growth on it for all that period of time and been able to use that cash for other things. So that's all you're doing really, is getting a return of the premium, which, from a planning standpoint, hopefully if you work through your plan correctly, you can say, well, what's the impact? And by the way, long-term care premiums are very expensive, right? This is $5,000, $6,000, $10,000 a year, probably. This is really big numbers. So hopefully you can work through your plan and say, what's the impact of having this premium in my plan? And that's the way that I would think about this, literally, is kind of 2 different matrix, right? I have the insurance. I don't have the insurance. I need the insurance. I don't need the insurance. And run your plan with each one of those boxes. So I have it and I need it. What's my plan look like at the end? I have it and I don't need it, so I just pay for it unnecessarily, right? Like, what's my plan look like? Am I still okay wasting the premium? What if I don't have it and I need it? That's really the big box, right? Because there's the other side of this too. If you have enough assets, you don't need to transfer the risk to the third party. You can just go, well, if I or my spouse needs assisted care, we'll just write a check.
And this is why I like starting with risk management, right? What's the risk? How would I handle it? And then figure out where insurance fits versus, Nationwide coming to you and going, hey, guess what? We have this insurance. Do you like it? Well,
yeah, it's 100% on the outcome of the plan, because you may look at it and say, while I don't like the premium, I actually have a better outcome in my plan if I pay the premium and don't need it than if I don't pay the premium and pay for it out of pocket.
Yeah.
It's better for me to waste the premium for 20 years than it is for me to pay for it for my entire plan and for my estate plan.
Because then you have a much more known outcome, which frees up tons of other assets. You're not worried about the rest of the assets.
Yeah.
Yeah. Risk management versus buying insurance. We talk about protecting your future here in the basement, your money, your job, your relationships, and on today's show, your estate. But one drunk decision behind the wheel that can destroy all of it and cost someone else their life. Don't risk everything you've worked for. Drinking and driving will change your whole world. Whether you get pulled over or get into a crash, things will never be the same. Getting a sober ride will change your world for the better. Drive sober or get pulled over, paid for by NHTSA. All right, time for us to mosey out into the community part of the show. Doug, it looks to me, looking at your notes, like there's a ton going on in the community.
We have several letters, Joe. a couple of really good ones. Which one do you want me to
And
start
a few
with
bad
first?
ones. So is that what you're saying? A couple of really good ones and then the others.
We are capable of filtering. Do you want to talk about 401k mistakes?
Yeah, let's talk about what Stacker Mike wrote us.
Okay. Yeah, Stacker Mike sent us a note about our 401k mistakes episode. He said he's listening to SB1723, how to fix 8 of the most common 401k mistakes. And on item 2, not adjusting your savings rate when you switch jobs or get a pay raise. You said, that's us, you said if you're putting in 10%, it allows for a higher dollar amount as you get a pay raise. I think Kiplinger's point was, which is what I do and suggest to others, when you get a pay raise, split it. Give half to your savings rate and half to your lifestyle creep. So if you're saving 10% right now and you get a 2% raise, you change your rate to 11%. If you change jobs and the increase equates to a 20% increase, that's a great opportunity to not only increase your lifestyle, but also your savings rate, not just the dollar amount.
That's a great strategy.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's the biggest thing when it comes to lifestyle, especially as you are early in your career, right? And you start out of college, you're making 70 grand, you change jobs, now you make 90, you change jobs, now you make 125. It's like when those things happen, a lot of times it's easy to just kind of pull that into lifestyle as opposed to saying, well, this is a great opportunity to radically change my savings rate.
It appears, by the way, Mike is a new listener. Yeah. And I see here down at the bottom, Doug, he asked, what's the best way to comment on the podcast? And there's a few fun ways. I love it if it's about how the show's made and questions about like behind the scenes. Feel free to write me, Joe at stackingbenjamins.com. I love what he did, went to the comment section. Also on Spotify, we have a lot of chatter there about the episodes. I really like that. We can either somebody on the team or sometimes me, we can chat along with you on that platform. On others like Apple, we can't chat back. So that one's a little more frustrating.
Don't forget about the basement.
And the basement. Great. Yeah. The basement Facebook group. Mike, welcome to the Stacker family. Glad you're with us. What else we got?
This one is a pretty interesting story. I love this one as well. Stacker David wrote to us about a recent episode we had on scams. He says a couple of days late, but what the heck? Tale for a future podcast. Well, here you go, David. My wife got a text purporting to be our bank stating we had a questionable transaction. It looked similar to legit comms we'd received in the past, so we were reluctant to just let it go. Quote, did you authorize X transaction? End quote. She replied, no, but I was already checking the app for parallel security notices, which I found none. She gets a call in response to her no reply and passes the call off to me. I'll admit, he was doing pretty good sounding the part, asking if we'd approved wire transfers to X person, which we said no. Aside, we'd recently made a major 6-figure YOLO purchase using wire transfers. I love that. Using wire transfers for the first time right off our freaking phone.
Wow.
I know it's way more secure than other methods, but here we are. What great timing on their part. He went through the checklist. Did we see any transactions to this person, odd charges on any of our credit card accounts, any Zelle or Venmo transfers or anything off in the last 3 days? He was good right up until he said he'd need me to confirm my balance, which I replied, you called me. I'm not providing you with any specifics.
Wow.
If you are with X of X fraud and security, I'm sure we can find a better way to reconcile our activity. And he said, quote, well, slap your forehead with a dildo and wave it in the air.
You're kidding me.
Nice confirmation. Didn't know X of X had moved on to those versus the old toasters. Hope all is well in the Arklatex, says David.
David, what a story. And Tim, you work in contracts. I mean, your whole day is looking at contracts. Man, these scammers are getting good and the devil's always in the details, it seems like.
They are, and you have to be extremely careful. And we're constantly like around the office here warning, and we do phishing simulations. The emails, they're getting so much better. And now with the AI stuff, I think you got to be incredibly careful.
Do they phish you guys sometimes trying to pretend they're the client?
What we get is a lot of emails and text messages from title companies that are trying to do a transfer and they want to get client information. And we do not hand out any of that information. You always verify with a phone call with someone we know rather than someone we don't know. And they're tricky too, because you can go, all right, I'm going to look and see if they have a website. Oh yeah, they'll have a website.
Right.
They'll have an address. Very careful. It's getting very difficult.
I did that once, and I can't remember the company I looked up, but I thought, I'm going to call them. And so I went and Googled phone number 4, and it was a fake number. And the only reason I caught it because it wasn't like an 800 number or an 8877
One of those
number.
900 numbers.
Yeah,
That's how they
probably.
gotcha.
But I mean, just be careful because they will go to some lengths to keep fooling you.
It's so sad.
Doug gets numbers and they say, instead of the rhythm that you're used to hearing, like 1-800-862-2232, Doug gets numbers rattled off to him as like 190068234887. And he just types them in.
Sure.
And there they
Those
go.
1900 numbers are the most exciting.
That's weird. Why does it have a plus sign in front of it? I don't get it.
If people want to hear a horrific story about a hacker experience, Stacker Shannon back on July 24th, 2017, told us her story. The episode's called Two Banks, One Hacker, $50,000. And all they did, Tim, by the way, to your point about being the title company, she was supposed to send wire transfer $50,000 to her through the title company. She gets an email from the title company at the last second. By the way, turns out it was the same email with just one character changed. One character changed. Somebody had been monitoring the conversation, this hacker, and said, hey, last minute change, you need to wire it here instead of to this other account. And she was busy. It looked like the same exact email address. So she followed the new instructions and emailed $50,000 to a hacker.
You got to know what your red flags are. And some of the red flags are last minute changes, urgency, all those things are, and then, usually if you hover over the email, you can see that it's not the same email that it's purporting to be. It used to be that you could say, well, look at the language. And if the language is not quite, the English isn't quite right. But nowadays the AI is getting really good at that. Just got to be very careful.
No, that's it. Well, and kudos to David for going, wait a minute, you called me.
Yeah, good job.
That's fantastic. Hey, we got a couple things happening. Number one, on Wednesday, September 3rd, 8:30 p.m. Eastern, 5:30 Pacific, I'm going to do a live webinar, HSA Basics for Beginners, how to use a health savings account. If you've heard us talk about health savings accounts, you've no idea how these things work, and you just need to know the basics. We're going to be doing that. StackyBenjamins.com/HSA is the way to get that. And then I'm coming to Portland. You guys want to go to Portland with me, OG?
Busy.
Tim?
Sure. I'll go to Portland.
Come on.
They've got good beer there.
We're going to be there September 9th with our friends from the Catching Up to Fi episode and our good friend Jesse Kramer. We are going to be meeting stackers and catchers and what does Jesse call his friends? Piffers?
Flies?
Flies. Portland, Oregon, Broadway Grill and Brewery, 6:30 p.m. StackyBenjamins.com/meetup tells us you're coming so we can make sure the venue knows how many stackers we got coming there. So come join us in Portland. I think that's it for the back porch. Tim, man, thanks again for coming back and mentoring our stacker community today. We super appreciate it. If people want more from you, I know you were here last time with your book. You deal with this stuff all day, every day. How do people find you?
Yeah, and it always starts with a conversation. So we encourage people to reach out. You can go to our website, which is Semro, SEMRO, Henry, HENRY.com, and reach out and we'll have a conversation.
Awesome. We'll also link to it in the show notes at StackyBenjamins.com. And thanks a ton again, Tim. All right, Doug, you got it from here, man. We got a list of to-dos. What's our big three?
That's right, Joe. First, take some advice from Tim Semro. Thinking about your estate plan? Do it now. Don't wait for an event because that event might be the one you need it for. Second, life insurance? Choose your coverage based on your goals. If you work backwards, you'll make great insurance decisions. But the big lesson? The most important estate planning tip is this. Don't leave your stuff to strangers. Leave it to Doug. Except your chainsaw. After today's trivia, I'm good, man. Huge thanks to Tim Semro for joining us. For more on Tim or for a copy of his book, head to semrohenry.com. Hit the Trust Book link at the top of the website for his book. Walking the dog? I got you covered. I'll have my people add a link at stackingbenjamins.com in our show notes for today's episode. This show is the property of SB Podcasts, LLC, copyright 2025. and is created by Joe Saul-Sehy. Joe gets help from a few of our neighborhood friends. You'll find out about our awesome team at stackingbenjamins.com, along with the show notes and how you can find us on YouTube and all the usual social media spots. Come say hello. Oh yeah, and before I go, not only should you not take advice from these nerds, don't take advice from people you don't know. This show is for entertainment purposes only. Before making any financial decisions, speak with a real financial advisor. I'm Joe's mom's neighbor, Doug, and we'll see you next time back here at the Stacking Benjamin Show.
Welcome to the after show. Doug, you were telling us a week ago about a scam in progress.
Right. A couple of weeks ago, I was staying with some friends. One morning, I come upon them both hovering over their laptop, and they're kind of in a bit
And they're
of a
starting to
panic.
figure out that you staying with them has been a huge scam all along.
What the hell is he still doing here?
Wait, they're on to me.
And they had gotten a call from their financial advisor first thing in the morning, asking if they were really buying a new piece of property for $100,000. And they said, no, we're done. Like we moved here. We're not buying any more property. Somebody had gotten the password for their email, had cruised through all of their emails, got tons of personal details, and then sent an email to their financial planner and said, we just found this property. We just fell in love with it. We need you to transfer $100,000 to, but we just opened this new bank account, transfer $100,000 to our new bank account. They had a ton of details, used personal names, used the location of the town where they were buying. Like it looked like they saw the email. The financial planner shared it with them. They were shocked at how
this person knew everything.
They knew everything because they got into the email, found the name and the number of the financial planner. And, thank God that planner had a process and a policy in place that said, we don't do anything unless we talk to our clients directly. And it was just pretty shocking that had happened that soon after they moved there. So it was also kind of timing is everything, like the story that we heard earlier from David, I think it was, who said that they had just done a 6-figure YOLO purchase. My friends had done something similar. They had only recently moved up there. And so it all fit, like the timing all seemed to their financial planner. It seemed like, well, yeah, this could happen. This is plausible.
Sure.
Unbelievable what timing can do to steal people's money.
I had a situation that, it's not just when things have changed. We had the bank that we use for the law firm called us, and we've used this bank for a really long time. They called us just to do one of those final checks. And they said, hey, so we're about to transfer that money that you asked to your separate account in Texas. And I'm like, we don't have a new account. What are you talking about? And they're like, they were so embarrassed. They're like, oh my goodness, I can't believe we got this far.
Wow.
At least it caught it, but they had gotten that far where they were ready to send it. And this was their final check. And wow. So even if it's a relationship you have all the time, you always vigilant.
Oh, geez, just now realizing how close he was to getting that money.
Oh, so close.
That's how they knew everything.
Son of a...